Most viewers around the world watched the carefully staged handshakes and diplomatic ceremonies in Beijing this week with considerable interest. The Temple of Heaven tour, the widely circulated smiling photographs alongside Xi Jinping, and the public discussions touching on Boeing jet orders alongside agricultural purchases like soybeans drew significant media coverage across international outlets. Yet almost everyone missed the part that actually carries the greatest long-term significance for global power dynamics. Because somewhere between the formal state banquet held on May 14th and the moment Air Force One lifted off from Beijing on the 15th, Donald Trump conveyed a message to Xi Jinping regarding the ongoing situation with Iran that, when examined closely and without the filter of partisan framing, reveals more about the current standing of the United States in 2026 than any single speech delivered from the Oval Office, any tariff adjustment, or any campaign rally event. It was not delivered as an ultimatum or a clearly defined red line drawn in the sand. Instead, the exchange came across in essence as a request for assistance at a sensitive moment. The implications flowing from that particular conversation extend far beyond the immediate diplomatic context and cascade across multiple critical domains, including international energy markets, advancements in artificial intelligence technologies, semiconductor supply chain stability, the relative strength of the U.S. dollar in global trade, and the fundamental question of whether the next 20 years will continue to reflect an era of American primacy or evolve into a more multipolar configuration shaped by different centers of influence. It is essential to walk through these developments with care and precision, because the surface narrative that Trump met with Xi, secured some commercial understandings, and returned home, fails to encompass the real underlying story. The authentic narrative is structural at its core, revolving around questions of leverage, deeply embedded economic and technological dependencies, and policy decisions stretching back across multiple decades that stood fully exposed during the closed-door sessions in Beijing for anyone attuned to the finer details of strategic competition. Many observers, understandably focused on daily pressures and headline summaries, did not engage at that deeper analytical level and instead concentrated on the visual highlight reel broadcast across global networks. A careful examination of the engineering, diagram, and strategic architecture beneath the public performance demonstrates why this particular trip, which various outlets have framed as either a clear triumph for American interests or a notable disappointment depending on the ideological perspective of the channel, is in reality neither of those simplistic characterizations. It represents instead a very expensive, highly visible signal regarding the present state of the international system. And such signals hold substantial importance because they help shape expectations and decisions in the periods that follow. Let me elaborate on what is meant by this assessment and why this specific moment in mid-May 2026 is likely to be referenced and studied by historians, analysts, and policymakers for a long time to come, not chiefly for the limited announcements that emerged publicly, but for the deeper realities that the meetings brought into plain view. Setting the broader stage for context, as of this week, the international community finds itself in the third month of an active and ongoing conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, with significant regional ramifications. The ceasefire that President Trump had announced earlier remains, according to his own statements given during recent Fox News appearances, in a precarious state and essentially on life support. The Strait of Hormuz, that vital, narrow maritime choke point situated between Iran and Oman, through which approximately one-fifth of the world's daily oil supply and substantial volumes of liquefied natural gas transit, has experienced major disruptions to normal commercial shipping patterns. Iranian authorities have introduced demands for transit fees on vessels, while United States responses have included actions to block certain Iranian port operations. These developments have contributed to noticeable spikes in gasoline prices across the United States and injected considerable jitteriness into global oil benchmark pricing. Against this tense backdrop, President Trump undertook his first visit to Beijing since 2017, accompanied by a high-level delegation that featured prominent business leaders, including Tim Cook of Apple and representatives from several major American corporations. China stands as the single largest purchaser of Iranian oil on the global market, and roughly 40% of China's overall energy requirements remain linked to the security and openness of that same strategic waterway. By comparison, the United States now derives essentially none of its domestic oil consumption from the Persian Gulf region, thanks to the transformative impact of the shale revolution that gained momentum over the past decade and fundamentally altered American energy independence calculations. This fundamental asymmetry defined the atmosphere and content of every discussion held within the Zhongnanhai leadership compound. Both sides entered the meetings with full awareness of this imbalance. The central question that emerges is which leader and which nation managed to navigate and utilize that asymmetry more effectively during the limited time available. To arrive at a grounded assessment, it becomes necessary to concentrate on the actual statements and readouts, rather than the ceremonial optics that dominated television coverage. In two separate interviews conducted with Fox News anchors Sean Hannity and Brett Baier after the visit, President Trump provided detailed characterizations of his private conversations with Xi Jinping. He recounted that Xi had expressed a willingness to be of help if possible, and had provided assurances that China would refrain from supplying military equipment to Iran, a commitment that Trump highlighted as carrying significant weight. At the same time, Trump acknowledged that China planned to continue its purchases of Iranian oil at discounted rates made possible by current market conditions. The official White House summary of the meetings indicated that both leaders had concurred on the principle that Iran must not be permitted to acquire nuclear weapons, and that the Strait of Hormuz needed to remain open for international commerce without undue interference. Turning attention to the Taiwan dimension of the discussions, Trump emphasized in those same interviews that he was not seeking or encouraging moves toward formal independence on the island, and expressed reluctance about the prospect of the United States becoming engaged in military conflict so far from its shores at a distance of some 9,500 miles. He conveyed a desire for both Beijing and Taipei to exercise restraint and cool tensions. Regarding a pending arms package for Taiwan valued at approximately $14 billion, Trump maintained an ambiguous stance, noting that the decision could go either way depending on future developments. When Xi reportedly pressed directly on the question of whether Washington would commit to defending Taiwan in a crisis, Trump later told reporters aboard Air Force One that he had declined to discuss operational contingencies in explicit terms. On the broader theme of international relations, he remarked that favors are typically exchanged reciprocally, but added his belief that China might still offer assistance on Iran regardless. These constitute the primary factual elements emerging from the trip based on public reporting. Xi Jinping, during his opening remarks, invoked the concept known as the Thucydides trap, referring to the historical pattern in which a rising power challenges an established one and the heightened risk of conflict that can result, with particular reference to tensions surrounding Taiwan. According to accounts shared afterward, including references in Trump's own social media communications, there were also allusions to perceptions of the United States as potentially entering a phase of relative decline. These data points from the summit provide the foundation for further analysis. Drawing on more than 2 decades of experience across high-stakes negotiations ranging from supplier contracts during critical periods at technology companies to complex government agreements where counterparties held structural advantages, it becomes evident that the literal words spoken in such meetings represent only a modest fraction of the overall dynamic. The remaining majority derives from factors such as which party initiated the high-level engagement, who controlled the agenda and timing, and which side maintained influence over the truly decisive variables like supply chains and market access. By those operational metrics, the Beijing summit did not present itself as a classic negotiation between two fully equal strategic peers, but rather took on characteristics of a request framed within the protocol of a leader-level meeting. The United States traveled to the Chinese capital rather than hosting. American officials sought Chinese cooperation regarding the Iran situation. The Taiwan arms package remained in an undecided posture that did not require immediate Chinese concessions, and public messaging indicated limited appetite for extended military commitments far from American shores. While such positioning can be interpreted through the lens of domestic pragmatism and war fatigue among the American public, from a pure game theoretic standpoint, broadcasting reduced commitment signals in the very period when seeking assistance from a long-term strategic competitor introduces complexities that can influence how resolve is perceived by multiple audiences. And if you are finding value in this detailed daily breakdown, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more comprehensive geopolitical and economic analysis delivered consistently. Xi Jinping emerged from the sessions with an invitation extended for a future visit to Washington later in the year, while offering relatively little in the way of concrete public commitments on the Iran file beyond the stated assurances. This sequence aligned closely with the structural advantages available to China in the current configuration of dependencies. The Beijing trip itself did not generate the underlying imbalances, but served to illuminate them with greater clarity for observers monitoring supply chain resilience and defense industrial capacity. In the course of the past 3 months of heightened military activity in the Middle East, United States inventories of advanced missile interceptors, including Patriot systems, THAAD batteries, and SM-3 variants, have experienced measurable depletion. These sophisticated munitions require extended manufacturing lead times, often stretching to 18 months or more, and depend on specialized rare earth elements and processed materials, a substantial portion of global refining capacity, for which resides within Chinese facilities. This reality places the United States in the position of drawing down critical defense stocks, while simultaneously engaging diplomatically with the primary nation linked to the resupply pipeline, a configuration that underscores vulnerabilities accumulated across 3 decades of globalization patterns. Such exposures reinforce the strategic value of pursuing vertical integration, prioritizing domestic manufacturing resurgence, and securing complete oversight of end-to-end supply chains for essential technologies and materials. These principles, proven important at the corporate level in industries requiring rapid innovation and reliability, translate directly to national security considerations. A nation that cannot independently generate its own critical defense components, advanced semiconductor devices, or resilient energy infrastructure finds itself negotiating from a baseline of constraint, irrespective of the individual occupying the highest office. The meetings in Beijing did not invent these challenges, but rendered them visible in real time on the international stage. Expanding on the energy dimension in greater depth, the persistence of global price linkages means that instability in a maritime choke point, thousands of miles from American coasts, can still transmit inflationary pressure directly to consumers in states such as Ohio, Texas, and California through refined product markets and futures trading mechanisms. While domestic shale output has successfully decoupled the United States from direct physical reliance on Persian Gulf crude, the financial and political transmission belts remain intact and potent. In this environment, the acceleration of sustainable energy infrastructure, including widespread electrification of transport fleets, deployment of distributed solar generation, paired with advanced battery storage solutions, and the development of robust smart grid architectures transitions from being viewed primarily through an environmental policy lens to constituting essential elements of national resilience and independence. Every additional gigawatt-hour of domestically controlled storage capacity and every mile of electrified transportation network contributes incrementally to reducing external vulnerabilities and buffering against distant geopolitical shocks. Delving further into the domain of artificial intelligence and the foundational materials that enable it, discussions during the summit apparently included proposals for establishing dedicated deconfliction channels to manage AI-related competition and risks. While such mechanisms hold potential value for crisis management, genuine technological sovereignty in the AI era cannot be achieved without secure domestic capabilities to refine and process critical rare earth elements, including neodymium for high-performance magnets, gallium and germanium for specialized semiconductors, and numerous other inputs required for chip fabrication, data center cooling systems, electric motors, and advanced sensor arrays. Current global refining patterns show China accounting for approximately 80 to 90% of processed rare earth output, positioning the actual competitive frontier of the AI race not exclusively within research laboratories and algorithm development centers, but equally within mining operations, chemical processing plants, and materials science facilities distributed across continents. The semiconductor ecosystem and the central role of Taiwan constitute another layer of strategic exposure that received indirect attention through the public messaging. Comments regarding reluctance for distant military engagements were registered not only by domestic audiences, but also by leadership in Taipei, decision-makers in Tokyo and Seoul, and corporate boardrooms worldwide, whose operations depend on the continued stability of production at TSMC facilities. That company currently manufactures roughly 90% of the most advanced logic chips deployed in consumer electronics, training runs for frontier AI models, and precision-guided munition systems. Any erosion in perceived United States commitment credibility has the potential to introduce uncertainty throughout the entire global semiconductor value chain, with compounding effects that reach into supply contracts, investment decisions, and long-range corporate planning horizons. And if you are finding value in this detailed daily breakdown and want to stay ahead of these major shifts in geopolitics and technology, make sure to subscribe to the channel and support the work so we can continue delivering these in-depth daily reports. Considering plausible forward trajectories based on patterns observable in historical precedents, an optimistic pathway envisions the current Iran-related crisis acting as the long-awaited catalyst capable of aligning political capital with the technical and industrial requirements for rebuilding domestic resilience. Earlier disruptions, such as those experienced during the COVID period, generated initial momentum toward supply chain diversification, but saw urgency dissipate once immediate pressures eased. With sustained operational demands on U.S. forces and verifiable drawdowns in munition stockpiles, conditions may now favor more decisive action, including accelerated development of onshore rare earth separation and refining capacity, expansion of semiconductor fabrication plants already underway through the CHIPS Act initiatives in locations such as Arizona and Ohio, and the kind of large-scale battery manufacturing and grid modernization effort that parallels the scope and ambition of the interstate highway system constructed in the 1950s. A middle ground scenario, which aligns with the most common historical pattern when complex structural reforms are required, involves a series of incremental policy announcements, targeted executive orders, formation of new bilateral trade frameworks, and gradual implementation that reduces but does not fully eliminate key dependencies, thereby leaving the overall system somewhat more exposed when the next major shock arrives. A lower probability yet non-negligible tail risk pathway would involve miscalculations in multiple theaters simultaneously, with actors interpreting ambiguity around distant commitments as opportunity and a stretched defense industrial base struggling to replenish inventories at required speeds. Responsible risk engineering principles dictate designing systems and policies to withstand such tail events rather than optimizing narrowly around median expectations. The Beijing summit of mid-May 2026 is therefore likely to occupy a distinctive place in retrospective analysis, less for any specific signed documents, which were limited in public disclosure, and more for the systemic architecture it laid bare to attentive observers. The United States arrived in the Chinese capital positioned as the party seeking tangible help on a pressing security matter, an image that encapsulates the cumulative impact of 30 years of emphasis on short-term efficiency gains, extensive offshoring of manufacturing competencies, financial sector prioritization, and deferral of foundational infrastructure renewal. This posture does not equate to an irreversible national decline, despite certain characterizations offered during the meetings. Instead, it reflects the compounded costs of earlier choices that can still be corrected through deliberate and sustained effort. America retains the fundamental innovative capacity that enabled transformative achievements, including the rapid development of atomic weapons during the Manhattan Project in under 4 years, the successful Apollo program that placed humans on the lunar surface within 8 years of the initial commitment, the creation and global scaling of the Internet, the personal computing revolution, modern biotechnology breakthroughs, and the engineering of reusable orbital rocket systems that have redefined access to space. The human talent pool, research institutions, and entrepreneurial ecosystems remain among the strongest globally. What has periodically been insufficient is the consistent urgency and cross-partisan willingness to pursue expensive, long-horizon investments within a political incentive structure that frequently rewards immediate visible results over patient foundational work. The combination of ongoing Middle East developments and the insights provided by the high-profile Beijing engagement may ultimately be remembered as the inflection point that generated sufficient